Hello family, welcome back to History Edge. Relax, feel comfortable as we learn English with a great and interesting history. Today let's get to know a man so great history never forgot about him, Alexander the Great. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the ancient kingdom of Macedon, a harsh land of mountains, warriors, and political violence. Unlike the refined city-states of southern Greece, Macedon was viewed by many Athenians as backward and barbaric. Yet from this rugged kingdom would emerge a ruler who would shake the foundations of the world. On the night Alexander was born, legends claimed strange signs appeared across the heavens. Some said the temple of Artemis burned that same night because the goddess herself had abandoned her shrine to witness his arrival, his Afar's arrival. Others whispered that his mother, Olympias, dreamed of thunderbolts striking her womb before his birth. His father, King Philip II, was a brilliant military strategist who transformed Macedon into a terrifying war machine. His mother Olympias was fierce, mysterious, and deeply devoted to ancient religious rituals. Their marriage was filled with tension, ambition, and suspicion. Alexander grew up surrounded by violence and power. Even as a child, there were whispers that he was destined for greatness. The boy prince was unlike other children. He possessed intelligence that unsettled adults. He questioned philosophers with unnerving confidence. He trained endlessly with weapons. He listened to stories of heroes like Achilles with burning fascination. Perhaps most dangerous of all, he believed he was meant to surpass them. One story from his youth became legendary across the ancient world. A massive black horse named Bucephalus was brought before King Philip. The animal was wild, uncontrollable, violent. No rider could tame it. A crowd laughed as experienced horsemen were thrown into the dirt. Then young Alexander stepped forward. He noticed something the others had missed. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. Slowly, calmly, Alexander turned the animal toward the sun so it could no longer see the darkness frightening it. Then he mounted the beast. Silence fell. A horse obeyed. King Philip reportedly wept with pride and said, "My son, seek a kingdom equal to yourself. Macedon is too small for you." Those words would haunt the world. Alexander's education was entrusted to one of the greatest minds in history, Aristotle. Under Aristotle, the prince studied philosophy, medicine, literature, politics, and science. He read Homer obsessively, especially the Iliad. Achilles became his idol. Alexander slept with a copy of the epic beneath his pillow alongside a dagger. But while Aristotle taught reason, Alexander was drawn toward glory. He did not dream of peace. He dreamed of eternal remembrance. In ancient Greece, immortality did not belong to the body. It belonged to memory, to songs, to stories, to names spoken centuries after death. Alexander wanted more than a kingdom. He wanted eternity. At 16 years old, while Philip campaigned abroad, Alexander was left to rule Macedon as regent. Most expected the boy to fail. Instead, rebellion erupted, and Alexander crushed it without mercy. He led cavalry into battle, destroyed enemy strongholds, and founded a city named Alexandropolis. It was only the beginning of a terrifying pattern. Everywhere he conquered, cities bearing his name would rise from blood-stained earth. Philip began seeing something dangerous in his son, ambition. Not the ambition of a prince satisfied to inherit, the ambition of a man impatient for destiny. Tension inside the royal family soon exploded. Philip took a new wife named Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian noblewoman. During the drunken wedding feast, one of Cleopatra's relatives publicly questioned Alexander's legitimacy as heir forces. The banquet descended into chaos. Alexander hurled insults across the hall. Philip, drunk with rage and wine, drew his sword and stumbled toward his son. But the king collapsed onto the floor before reaching him. Alexander reportedly laughed bitterly and declared, "Here is the man preparing to cross from Europe into Asia, Solnipatus, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another." A humiliation poisoned the family. After Alexander and Olympias temporarily fled Macedon, the kingdom stood on the edge of fracture. Blood changed everything. In 336 BC, King Philip II was assassinated during a grand celebration. The murder shocked Greece. Believed it was revenge. Others suspected political conspiracy. Many quietly wondered whether Olympias or even Alexander himself had been involved. History never found certainty. At Philip's death opened the door Alexander had waited for his entire life. At only 20 years old, he became king of Macedon. Immediately, enemies surrounded him. Greek city-states rebelled. Rival nobles plotted against him. Foreign kingdoms prepared for war. Many believed the young ruler would collapse within months. Instead, Alexander moved with terrifying speed. The new king understood one brutal truth. Mercy could look like weakness. When the Greek city of Thebes revolted against Macedonian control, Alexander marched south with astonishing speed. The rebels were stunned to see him arrive so quickly. Many had believed rumors that he was already dead. Alexander offered surrender. So the city refused. What followed became one of the most horrifying massacres in Greek history. Macedonian forces stormed Thebes, slaughtering thousands. Streets filled with screams, smoke, and collapsing stone. Survivors were dragged into slavery. Homes burned while bodies rotted beneath shattered temples. The destruction was deliberate. Alexander wanted Greece terrified. And it worked. After Thebes, no major Greek city dared rebel again. A young king had announced himself to the world in fire. Now Alexander turned east toward the greatest empire on earth. A Persian Empire stretched across millions of square miles from Egypt to India. Its wealth was unimaginable, its armies enormous. Its king, Darius II, ruled over one of the most powerful civilizations humanity had ever seen. Compared to Persia, Macedon was tiny. Yet Alexander believed destiny favored him. In 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia with roughly 40,000 men. Legend says he threw a spear into the soil upon landing and claimed Asia as a gift from the gods. Ahead of him waited deserts, armies, assassins, starvation, and death. Behind him waited history. Alexander's first major battle against Persian forces came at the Granicus River. The Persian commanders expected the Macedonians to hesitate before crossing the dangerous waters. Alexander attacked immediately. The river became chaos. Horses screamed. Spears shattered. Men drowned beneath armor as blood mixed with rushing currents. Alexander himself nearly died. A Persian nobleman raised an axe and struck Alexander's helmet with crushing force. The blade sliced through metal and narrowly missed his skull. Another Persian moved in for the killing blow. Before he could strike, one of Alexander's companions cut the attacker down. The young king survived by seconds, and when the battle ended, Persia's western defenses had collapsed. The invasion had truly begun. Alexander's first major battle against Persian forces came at the Granicus River. The Persian commanders expected the Macedonians to hesitate before crossing the dangerous waters. Alexander attacked immediately. The river became chaos. Horses screamed, spears shattered, men drowned beneath armor as blood mixed with rushing currents. Alexander himself nearly died. A Persian nobleman raised an axe and struck Alexander's helmet with crushing force. The blade sliced through metal and narrowly missed his skull. Another Persian moved in for the killing blow. Before he could strike, one of Alexander's companions cut the attacker down. O young king survived by seconds. And when the battle ended, Persia's western defences had collapsed. The invasion had truly begun. In 333 BC, Alexander faced Darius III directly at the Battle of Hydaspes. A Persian king commanded a vastly larger army. The battlefield thundered beneath thousands of soldiers, chariots, and cavalry. For many Macedonians, this was the moment they expected death. Alexander attacked the center with astonishing aggression. He rode directly toward Darius. The Persian king watched as the young conqueror carved through defenders like a force of nature. Panic spread. Then came the unthinkable. Arius fled. The King of Kings abandoned the battlefield while his army collapsed behind him. His family was captured alive. His mother, wife, and daughters expected torture or execution. Instead, Alexander treated them with royal respect. But kindness did not soften the humiliation. A Persian king had run from battle. The world knew it. After Issus, Alexander marched south along the eastern Mediterranean coast. One city stood against him longer than any other, Tyre. The island fortress seemed impossible to conquer. Massive walls rose from the sea itself. Tyrian defenders mocked Alexander from the battlements. He responded with fury. Alexander ordered the construction of an enormous causeway stretching across the water toward the city. For months, men labored under arrows, stones, and fire. The siege became a nightmare. Bodies floated in the surf. Siege towers burned. Soldiers drowned beneath collapsing structures. Alexander refused to retreat. Finally, after 7 brutal months, Macedonian forces breached the walls. What followed was slaughter. Thousands died. Thousands more were sold into slavery. Tyre became another warning written in blood. Alexander then entered Egypt, where he was welcomed not as conqueror, but as savior. The Egyptians despised Persian rule. Priests greeted Alexander with ceremony and reverence. He embraced their traditions carefully, understanding the power of symbolism. Reshape. In Egypt, he founded one of history's greatest cities, Alexandria. It would become a beacon of learning, trade, and culture long after Alexander's death. But Egypt also changed him spiritually. He traveled deep into the desert to the Oracle of Siwa, a mysterious temple dedicated to the god Ammon. What happened there remains uncertain. Ancient historians recorded only fragments. Claimed the priests declared Alexander the son of Zeus. Others believed the young king himself began accepting divine status. Whatever occurred inside that sacred chamber, Alexander emerged different. The line between man and God slowly began to blur. His soldiers noticed changes in him: greater pride, greater distance, greater hunger for worship. Yet his campaigns continued with unstoppable momentum. In 331 BC, Alexander marched toward the decisive confrontation with Darius the Death. A battlefield was called Gaugamela. There, the fate of empires would be decided. Darius prepared carefully for the battle. The Persians selected wide-open terrain ideal for massive cavalry and scythed chariots. Some ancient estimates described hundreds of thousands of Persian troops, though historians debate the true numbers. Till Alexander was heavily outnumbered. Night before battle, fear swept through the Macedonian camp. But Alexander slept calmly. At dawn, he mounted Bucephalus and rode before his men beneath rising sunlight. Then the armies collided. The sound was monstrous. Iron smashing against bone, horses collapsing, men screaming beneath blades and trampling feet. Again Alexander drove directly toward Darius. Again panic consumed the Persian king, and again Arius fled. A Persian Empire shattered. One of the greatest powers in human history collapsed before a man not yet 30 years old. Chapter. After Gaugamela, Alexander entered the magnificent cities of Persia. Babylon opened its gates peacefully. The conqueror walked through halls dripping with gold, incense, silk, and unimaginable wealth. Then came Persepolis. The ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire stood as a symbol of centuries of imperial power. Alexander occupied the city. And one night, after drinking heavily during a celebration, flames erupted through the palace complex. Some believed it was revenge for Persia's earlier invasions of Greece. Others believed Alexander immediately regretted it. But regret could not stop the fire. The palaces of Persian kings burned into the night sky, while ancient treasures melted into ash. Civilization itself seemed to scream. Though Persia had fallen, Alexander refused to stop. Most kings would have secured their empire. Alexander wanted more. He pursued Darius relentlessly across Asia. But before Alexander could capture him, Persian nobles betrayed their king. Darius was stabbed and left dying in a wagon beside the road. When Alexander found him, the once mighty ruler lay covered in blood and dust. According to legend, Alexander covered Darius with his own cloak. Perhaps he respected him. Perhaps he pitied him. Or perhaps Alexander understood something terrifying. This was how kings ended, not in glory, but abandoned. With Darius dead, Alexander declared himself ruler of Asia. Yet victory brought paranoia. Conspiracies haunted his court. Old friends became suspects. Trust decayed beneath endless war. The CCs. One night during a drunken argument, Alexander quarreled with Cletus the Black, one of his most loyal companions, and the very man who had once saved his life at Granicus. Herds turned vicious. Cletus accused Alexander of becoming arrogant, corrupted by Persian luxury and divine fantasies. Raged, Alexander seized a spear, killed him. Silence filled the hall. A conqueror stared at the corpse of his friend in horror. For days he reportedly wept and refused food, but guilt could not undo death. Something inside Alexander darkened forever. As campaigns dragged deeper into Central Asia, resistance intensified. The terrain was brutal. Mountains tore apart supply lines. Guerrilla warfare exhausted Macedonian troops. Rebellions erupted repeatedly. Alexander answered with savage retaliation. Entire populations were massacred, settlements destroyed, suspected rebels crucified or executed publicly. Yet even amid bloodshed, he fell in love. He married Roxana, a noblewoman from Bactria described by ancient writers as extraordinarily beautiful. For a brief moment, the conqueror seemed almost human again. Tegot, but peace never lasted around Alexander, or always returned. By now Alexander's men were exhausted beyond imagination. They had marched thousands of miles across deserts, rivers, mountains, and battlefields for nearly a decade. Many had not seen home since youth. Yet Alexander hungered for India. Him, the edge of the world still waited ahead. And so the army marched again into monsoon rains, suffocating jungles and unfamiliar kingdoms, ere they encountered war elephants for the first time, gigantic beasts armored for battle, living towers of destruction. The battle of the Hydaspes river against King Porus became one of Alexander's hardest victories. Rain hammered the battlefield while rivers churned violently beneath the storm. Porus fought with remarkable courage. His elephants crushed soldiers beneath enormous feet, while terrified horses panicked at their scent and noise. A battle descended into horror. Mud mixed with blood. Men disappeared beneath trampling beasts. Spears shattered against armor and flesh. But eventually Alexander prevailed. When Porus was captured and brought before him, Alexander asked how he wished to be treated. Porus answered simply, "Like a king." Alexander admired the response so much that he allowed Porus to continue ruling. Amid conquest, he respected strength. But now the Macedonian army finally broke. The Hydaspes River soldiers refused to march farther east. They were done with endless war, done with rain, disease, death, and exile. Rumors spoke of even greater kingdoms deeper in India with armies too massive to defeat. Alexander raged. He isolated himself for days, hoping pride or fear would force obedience. Failed. For the first time in years, Alexander could not conquer a kingdom at the will of his own men. Reluctantly he turned back. The journey home became a nightmare worse than battle. Alexander led part of his forces through the Joshan desert, one of the harshest landscapes on earth. Heat annihilated them, water vanished, horses collapsed. Men drank contaminated liquid and died screaming. Sandstorms buried soldiers alive beneath dunes. Thousands perished without enemy contact. Ancient writers described corpses scattered across endless wasteland, while vultures circled overhead. Alexander chose this route remains debated. Some historians believe he wanted to surpass legendary heroes who had failed crossing the desert. True, his obsession with glory was now killing his own army. When Alexander finally returned west, he found his empire unstable. Governors abused power, corruption spread, rebellions simmered, and grief struck him brutally. His closest companion, Hephaestion, died suddenly after illness. Alexander collapsed emotionally. Some described his mourning as almost unbearable madness. He executed doctors, blamed for the death. He ordered massive funeral ceremonies. Entire regions mourned by royal decree, and any believed Hephaestion had been more than a friend, perhaps the only person Alexander ever truly trusted. Without him, the conqueror seemed spiritually hollow. In Babylon, Alexander began planning new campaigns. Arabia, perhaps Carthage, perhaps even lands beyond. His ambition never ended. Ominous signs surrounded him. Prophecies warned against entering Babylon. Strange events frightened priests and advisers. Some claimed ravens fell dead from the sky. Alexander ignored them. He held banquets, drank heavily, discussed future wars. Then suddenly he became ill. The fever worsened day by day. First Alexander continued giving orders from bed, but soon even speaking became difficult. His generals gathered anxiously while rumors exploded through the city. Had he been poisoned? Ancient sources disagree. Some blame disease such as malaria or typhoid. Others suspect wounds, and exhaustion finally destroyed his body after years of relentless campaigning. What is certain is this: the strongest man in the world was dying slowly while everyone watched helplessly. As Alexander weakened, panic consumed the empire. Who would inherit his throne? According to later accounts, when asked to whom he left his empire, Alexander whispered to the strongest. Whether true or legend, the answer proved prophetic, because after his death, his generals would tear the empire apart through decades of bloody conflict. On June 10 or 11, 323 BC, Alexander died in Babylon at just 32 years old. The conqueror who had never lost a battle could not defeat mortality. After his death, chaos erupted immediately. His body became a prize fought over by rival successors. His empire fractured into competing kingdoms ruled by former generals. Alexander's influence survived the destruction. Greek culture spread across vast regions through the Hellenistic world. Cities he founded became centers of trade and learning. Cultures blended in ways that reshaped history itself. Rome, centuries later, would study him obsessively. Julius Caesar reportedly wept before a statue of Alexander because he had achieved so little by the same age. The shadow of Alexander lingered over empires long after his bones turned to dust. But history still wrestles with one haunting question. Who was Alexander truly? Visionary? Monster? Liberator? Destroyer? He built cities and burned civilizations. He admired knowledge yet unleashed massacres. He inspired unimaginable loyalty while feeding endless war. Perhaps he was all those things at once. The deeper one studies Alexander, the harder he becomes to define, because greatness itself often walks hand in hand with devastation. Today, more than 2,000 years after his death, the name Alexander still echoes across human history. Children learn of him in schools. Generals study his tactics. Historians debate his legacy endlessly. Yet beyond the legends and victories lies something painfully human. A young man terrified of being forgotten, conqueror who chased immortality across continents. And a king who reached the edge of the known world only to discover the same ending awaiting every man. Violence, the slow collapse of everything he built. But perhaps that is why Alexander endures, not because he conquered the world, but because he revealed the terrible price of trying to conquer time itself.